I'm going to use a few products in a different way that you may not think of. A couple stamps as well as your ink pads. Let's combine bright colors for a muted palette. First off, we're going to start by creating some of our own hues. Now, hue refers to color, so I'm really looking for earthy colors. And when you combine complementary colors such as orange and blue, like you see me doing here, combining orange twist with a combination of Fiesta blue and something borrowed, I'm getting a muddy color, and that's really what I'm looking for. I will do the same thing with the tiara, which is the yellow all the way to the right, and the purple kind of just next to that, which is flirty fuchsia. One muddy color is going to give me more of an earthy color, more of on the brown reddish scale, and that's going to be the purple yellow mixture. And then the other side is going to give me more of an earth tone. So just play around with your colors that you have. You know, you don't always need to work in the color that you actually have in your ink pad. Sometimes just smashing it down on a craft pad, like I did here and testing it out on a watercolor strip there, you see you have lots of really cool colors. Now here I have a mask that I've cut out, and this is using the lattice frame die, also from this collection. It comes with two dies, one that creates an actual frame, which you'll see on my blog in a few projects. And then this is the actual mat to that frame. This is going to create my actual picture frame, if you will. The mat is cut out of masking paper, and I smashed down a little bit of aquatini there all the way to the left. And you see me still adjusting my color a little bit. I want to make sure that I'm adding a little bit of water to that, so that I can decrease the intensity of that. I want that to be really, really light. Starting off with more of an earth tone there. I'm just spritzing a little bit of water just to be able to add and wash that out a little. When I'm working with watercolor like this is the wet to dry technique. I have a dry piece of 140-pound watercolor paper there, and I've got a number 6 round brush. You see, I grabbed some of the brownish earthy tone. I laid down the grayish earth tone first and then the brown, and we're just going to continue to just build a border really light. You want to work light to dark when you're watercoloring. It's a lot easier to build up and it's difficult to take away. So I'm going to blend that out a little bit. My goal for this watercolor landscape is really to have an effortless look to it, and that I'm going to achieve that by feathering out that color a little bit with a clean brush. Every now and then you'll see my arm cross the screen, and that's me cleaning my brush in a little water pot. Now I'm building a mountain here. I'm using that same earth tone, the brownish earth tone, and just kind of painting one. I'm just painting the top of the mountain. I'm not bringing it all the way to the foreground, because in between we're going to add some aquatini right here. And the aquatini is watered down a little bit. I wanted to decrease the intensity of that as well, not have it be so saturated. And then once we're done with our little scene, I will end up adding a little bit of foliage there. Adding a little bit of watered down tiara there, just kind of creating something different on the other side. It could be a field of, straw. It could be anything really. And what we're doing, just like you would in any other painting, is we're working with the background first, and then we will paint the foreground on top of it. You kind of work in reverse order when you're painting. Now that we have our mountain and water completed, we're going to work on the sky a little bit. So to create a sky, you can see I'm taking a little tiny bit of water there away from the edge. I was a little worried about water seeping under the mask. I'm just adding a little teeny tiny bit of a second mountain peak there off to the right, kind of adjusting a little bit, and then I'm going to clean my brush and move on to the sky. We're going to start off with some Fiesta blue for the sky, which is the perfect color for sky, but I'm going to spray a little bit of water off to the left of my Fiesta blue, and we're going to create a very watered down version of Fiesta blue, because I want to make sure that I can build it up if I need to. So there, I just spritz the water, grabbing a little bit of color, and off to the right I have a little teeny tiny strip of watercolor paper, and I'm constantly checking my watercolor before I add it to my project. It's really important when you're painting to do that. So I'm adding this color here, and then you'll see me add a little bit of watered just clean water to the top, feathering it out, cleaning my brush. Gonna grab some of that clean water that I have there and just feathering that out because I don't want it to abruptly stop at the top. I want it to have that natural flow where it goes from color into watercolor paper. And honestly, the best way to achieve that is to practice first if you've never done it before actually doing it on your project for the very first time. Just take a piece of scrap paper and just practice a few times just getting that look. Adding a little bit of aquatini there to that and just kind of working with some clean water to kind of blend out my edges. I wanted to create a really soft look, and that was important to me. Now I added some green, and this is a mixture of a few colors just to create that, adding some water on top, just blending that out. And that was meant to be a little foliage across the water there on the other side. And we're going to work on creating more green in a moment. I really love how this turned out. It was flowy and effortless and very organic. It was a really nice scene. So you can see I'm just making some minor little adjustments here and there before we move on to creating the trees. Now we're going to reveal what this looks like, and I'm going to actually flip my mask around and look at that. See how cool that shape is? It just gives your watercolor a different look. I love it. It looks really good. So now, like I said, I'm going to flip that around, and I did this off screen mostly. I just wanted to make sure that it perfectly aligned up before moving on. And then next up, we're going to use two particular stamps. I have the large feather stamp and this one flower, which I have no idea what it's called, kind of a flower that is, but I'm going to use the tips of both stamps from there upward, and then the same thing on the feather. Now the feather, because it had other kind of parts to the feather, I painted the color on, but for the flower we stamped directly in. And I'm just kind of testing out. I had started to create a green there on my mat, and I'm going to go over in detail how exactly I did that right here. I'm going to start off with a little bit of orange twist, which is pretty much a pure orange, and then lime ricky. Lime ricky is one of my favorite greens in the Catherine Pooler Designs collection. If you don't have it, I encourage you to get it. We're going to take some of that grayish earth tone, not so much the reddish one, but more the gray one that we created using the orange and the blues. A little bit of Fiesta blue and a little bit of something borrowed, and I really stress the little bit there, not a lot. And then you're going to adjust your green as you go and test it out. And you can see I'm just kind of pulling a little bit from here, a little bit from there, till I get exactly the right hue. And then once I have that, and I have that on my little block, and that right there was perfect. I was really kind of going for that olive-ish color. And then we're going to use our stamp. We're going to use our block as a pad. And then we're going to pull that color into our scene. Now, the reason that I have my inks done down on the craft mat, it gives me an opportunity to create almost a watercolor. So you want it to look a little watery without being too watery. And that's really the key. You have to find that balance. So here you see that, and that is perfect. It's great. It's the right amount of water. It has that nice watercolor look without losing too much detail. I do actually stamp a few trees with a different color, a blend of Mint to Be, which is a kind of a bluish green, a true mint color, and aquatini, but that one I ended up getting a little too watery. So here you can see I'm just kind of stamping those trees a little bit. That third one is actually the tip of the feather, and you'll see me do that in a second on the other side. And then here I'm going to I'm stamping into Mint to Be over there with aquatini, and I'll end up creating a second palette there off to the right, so don't worry, you'll get to see that as well. And those are going to be more trees in the distance. And that Mint to Be is a great color, but it was a little too green, so I had to tone it down a little, and that's why I added a little bit of aquatini to it. And it's just great to just create a little bit more depth in your scene by adding those far off trees behind it, almost like shadow, if you will. So here you see I have a block over there, And I'm adding Mint to Be, and it's a true mint color. It's a beautiful color. I love working with it. And then just a little teeny tiny bit of aquatini to it. You don't want to do too much because you're not trying to create blue. You really want to maintain some of that green, and I added just a little too much water there. But that's okay. It still worked. I really wasn't going for a lot of detail on the far off trees, so it was okay. And then I just kind of combined these, and the ones that I stamped right there in the foreground, right in the front, I ended up kind of going over it with the green because there really wasn't any detail to the trees and it looked a little funny. But what that did was it gave me a little bit of depth to those trees too, because I had just that outer shade of that mint bluish hue there. So we're just creating some different trees going up along the mask. And then next we're going to pull in the feather. Now to do the feather, you can see I'm grabbing a brush, and you can see it has those other spikes to the feather there. It was going to be too hard to mask that off, and I didn't want to get a little mini tree shooting out to the side, so I chose to add my color with a watercolor brush, which worked just perfectly. And look at that, you have a different tree, almost kind of like a cypress tree, which really doesn't fit in the scene, but I needed two kinds of trees, and it worked perfectly. I loved it. The end result is a beautiful card, and having those different kind of trees really did help. It gave something a little different and unique to the scene. Now what I'm doing here is I'm starting to bring those trees in towards the center, alternating them a little bit. But what I'm going to do in the very center is just create little trees. So you don't want everything to be exactly the same height. You want to give it a little bit of variation and, you know, something that feels more organic. Not everything's going to be exactly the same in nature. That just doesn't really happen. So here I'm going to start to create some shorter trees. And you can see my one green palette was starting to get a little dry. Now when that happens, if you misstamp something like I just did, just grab your watercolor brush and kind of fill it in to the best of your ability. You can always go over it a second time with a stamp, but you know, use your watercolor brush. There I extended a tree a little bit. I'm adding a little bit of fill in between. You know, this doesn't have to be all stamped, but you can kind of see the scene starting to take shape. Now we're going to concentrate on those center trees that I was talking about. I'm going to use my watercolor brush to create a couple little trees, and I'm going to stamp the very tips of those two stamps. So you can see I'm going a little smaller here, and you can really tell that my little faux ink pad was drying up. I had to spritz it a little bit, which also when you add water to that, I'm also diluting it. You know, that's going to decrease the intensity of it. Painting a little on there directly, just really just kind of getting just those tips. You can see lots of little guys there. And that really helped give the scene a little bit more credibility, the varying heights of the trees. But I really love how it's starting to take shape. So now I'm just going to fill everything in before moving on to the next step. And the next step is just to create a couple birds. Now I'm just bringing a little bit more of that grayish earth in there, just so that it wasn't all completely green there, just right at the border. And these are the birds from the Birds of a Feather. You can see there's the giant feather, and this is a great stamp set, very versatile, lots of great elements. And I'm going to use a couple different birds. I was kind of playing with that large bird, and it kind of felt a little too big for the scene. The perspective wasn't right, so I ended up taking one of those medium tiny, if that's even a word, medium tiny. You can see me stamping it off to the left there, one of those little birds. And I'm going to stamp two of those and then take that teeny tiny trio and stamp that a little further away, because the closer the bird is to you, the larger it should be in size to give you proper perspective. Because if something is further away from you, it will be smaller. So that's where those teeny tiny birds come into play, and that helps give you a little bit more depth in your scene too. It gives you a little more realism, as if you're standing right there looking at the treetops and you've got those two larger birds a little closer to you, and see the three further off in the distance, and that really makes it more realistic. So now it's time for the big reveal. We're going to pull that away and look at that. Isn't that great? I love this scene. It really turned out wonderful. Now, I did create it a little too high on my card, so I ended up trimming my card down. That's what I'm kind of pointing to. A little too much white space there at the bottom. It didn't feel right because I didn't want the scene to start right at the middle of the card. I'm going to take a little midnight ink, and this is an archival ink, and just use that word inspire. The Birds of a Feather stamp set comes with 2 scripty handwritten words, inspire and cherish, and I loved it. It was perfect. Just an inspired watercolor. So it fit really well. And there you have it. Isn't that wonderful? I love it. Now I'm going to mat that onto gray right here. Here are some close-ups. And it's just a really cute little hand-painted card. But I used a couple stamps in the foreground there. I love it. It turned out really great. So next time, think about taking some of your colors that you have, those bright, vibrant, intense colors, and maybe blending them and create something totally new.